I find it fascinating how Republicans love to scream that abortion is murder and then turn around and write laws that are going to lead to a spike in the suicide of LGBTQ youth, which by proxy makes it murder. Interesting. Hey y'all, it's Alice, and today we need to talk about something just a bit more serious. Lawmakers in the South Dakota House and Senate have been trying to pass through a number of bills that will drastically affect and harm the lives of LGBTQ youth and adults. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through what exactly it is they're trying to do. I'm going to provide the actual text of the bills below in the description, and afterwards, I'll basically talk about why it is so critical to understand the impact these are going to have and then what you all watching can do. Now, the first bill to go over is HB 1215, which was introduced by State Representative Tony Randolph. And what this bill is going to do is outlaw marriage equality, which is unconstitutional because it goes against the federal ruling that made marriage equality legal nationwide. It's going to permanently legalize conversion therapy, which we've all learned by now is torture. Conversion therapy is a way to emotionally manipulate and abuse children into praying the gay away. But we all know by now that your sexuality, your identity is just an innate part of you, and the only thing this is going to do is traumatize these children, leave them with lifelong scars, and potentially lead them to killing themselves. It's absolutely disgusting. This bill will also ban changes to legal gender markers, which means that those who are going through the transition process, whether or not they've actually started hormone therapy, when it came time to change their ID, they would no longer be able to change their gender marker, which means regardless of how far along in their transition they are, whatever sex they were assigned at birth, that will permanently be on their ID and there's nothing they can do about it. Do we need to talk about how many problems this is going to cause whenever it comes to applying for healthcare, for housing, for any number of things where their ID has to be present? This is going to lead to even more discrimination, and it's only going to make it harder for them to progress in society the same way that cis people can. And lastly, it's going to block the passage of protections for the LGBTQ community, which means that they can be fired from a job just for being LGBTQ. They can lose their housing. They won't be able to have the same privileges that cis people will have simply for not being cis. And as bad as that is, this bill actually gets worse from here. HB 1215 explicitly defines marriage as between one man and one woman, barring counties from issuing marriage licenses to same-gender couples. It forbids the recognition of trans and non-binary people as their lived genders and prohibits county clerks from issuing them amended birth certificates. And it even bars public libraries and schools from hosting drag queen story hours. So they're essentially borrowing from what a lot of evangelicals say of, well, marriage is only between one man and one woman because God made it that way. And they're trying to implement this into law, which in a way would violate the separation of church and state. And it doesn't entirely surprise me because one key component of conservatism is refusing to move forward with the times, of hanging on with a death grip to the way things used to be, regardless if the way things used to be was good or bad, which is exactly what they're doing right now. These lawmakers absolutely refuse to let us have a chance to exist like everyone else and do everything they can to maintain that last little sliver of power they still have. As bad as this bill is, I would argue that House Bill 1057 is by far the most sinister one out of all of them. This one would make it a misdemeanor for a doctor to provide any trans-affirming health care to a person under the age of 18, and it includes puberty blockers. Any trans youth in the state would now no longer be able to find the care they need for not only therapy to further understand themselves, but to be put on puberty blockers, which are perfectly natural, so they can have about 5 or so years to fully understand themselves and decide whether or not a transition is for them. And studies have even shown that puberty blockers will reduce suicidal thoughts by up to 15%. Dr. Alexis Chavez, medical director for the Trevor Project, said, "This bill actively contradicts evidence-based medical recommendations and restricts parents' ability to support their child with best practice care, which has been shown to decrease suicide risks. Medical decisions should be made between doctors and their families. Politicians have no role in this intensely personal process." Again, politicians are there to serve the people and not allow any of their own prejudices to interfere with the process. Alfonso David, president of the Human Rights Campaign, said if HB 1057 were to become law, it would send a strong message to trans youth that they are less than their peers and that lawmakers in the Capitol know better than doctors, parents, and trans youth. What isn't surprising to me, though, is that Fred Deutsch, the author behind Bill 1215, had an interview with Tony Perkins, the president of the Family Research Council, which, it should be noted, is a far-right evangelical hate group. And Tony Perkins himself has said all sorts of lovely things like, the presence of trans people in the military is the reason why people are being sexually assaulted. So, lovely human being. What Deutsch said in an interview was, "To me, this is a crime against humanity when these procedures are done by these so-called doctors. You know, I'm the son of a Holocaust survivor. I've had family members killed in Auschwitz, and I've seen the pictures of these bizarre medical experiments. I don't want that to happen to our kids, and that's what's going on right now." What he's doing is something that people on the religious right love to do, which is sensationalize something that has been proven to be safe and make it out to be something horrific. So think about abortion. People on the right love to say that it's murder, that they're taking the baby's body apart and dumping them or selling them. It's the exact same thing with these procedures, which, again, surgeries are not being performed on children. This is not something that doctors do unless it's a very, very extreme case. Also, it didn't surprise me at all whenever it came to light that the South Dakota Republican said he has never met or spoken to any of the doctors who offer hormone treatments to transgender patients. Again, if you don't actually know about the people you're legislating for, and you happen to be slightly bigoted against them, you're not actually going to do the first bit of research to find out what the results are going to be. The last two bills currently being pushed through are Senate Bill 88 and Senate Bill 93. Bill 88 would mandate that school counselors, school psychologists, or social workers disclose to a parent any young person's identification as transgender, exploration of gender identity, or reference to potential symptoms of gender dysphoria, which is essentially going to put a target on the back, not just on any LGBTQ kids who aren't out or maybe already are out, but it could also put a target on cis kids who, to the teachers, look queer. As we all know, transphobia doesn't just harm trans people, it harms everyone. And Senate Bill 93 would give a parent the right to refuse consent to a range of healthcare treatment options, including mental health treatment for young transgender people. It's essentially stripping these kids of all of their autonomy and saying that the doctors, politicians, and parents are the ones who have say over their lives, and regardless of this child knows that they are trans, it doesn't matter what the child is feeling. This bill basically tells them that their will doesn't matter. What they want is not as important as what the state wants, which is getting into some incredibly dangerous territory when the government over you starts telling you how you can or can't live. And we've seen this happen over and over again with politicians who are further to the right, is they basically throw the Constitution out the window and they say, well, we have an idea of how society should look and we're going to enforce it regardless of what the current laws in place say. If it allows us to maintain power and maintain our hold on society, we're going to do whatever it is necessary to do that. Even though at this point, the likelihood of all of these passing isn't that high, it still shows that these lawmakers are still determined to make life so difficult for us that we either leave the state or we disappear. And you can probably guess what I mean by disappear. And it seems like where all of these bills are coming from is something that Kristen Schilt, an assistant professor of sociology at the University of Chicago, calls gender panic. A deep cultural fear set off in this case when the naturalness of a male-female gender binary has been challenged. When such challenges affect public policy, Schultz said, that's when the panic starts to get really hot. And this is basically what I think is happening right now, because these lawmakers are not fighting for equality of all LGBTQ people. They're not fighting for full equality of women. They're not fighting for full equality of people of color. I fully believe right now what we're seeing is kind of like the final gasp of the GOP as we know them. They're throwing everything they can at the wall to prevent LGBTQ people from having a full, strong foothold in society, because they know that if people like myself have every bit of the same power as they do, within years they would all be out of office, which honestly, I think that until they are out of office, none of us are going to be safe. But the good thing is, despite all the pressure they put against us, it's not an impossible battle. And there are always associations like Lambda Legal, like the ACLU, like the Trevor Project, and more, which you can always donate to, you can do the groundwork for, you can do phone calls, emails, regardless of whatever it is. There are always things that we can do together to help send a message to these lawmakers that their bigotry is not going to be allowed to be the law of the land, that you either respect us as human beings and as equals, because we are, or your time in office is coming to an end. I'm gonna leave links below to 5 organizations in South Dakota that if you happen to live in this state, you'll be able to contact them, possibly do some sort of organizational work within the state with them, just to kind of wrap up everything. If you're using your position of power to willfully bring harm to people just because you can't accept the fact that, oh, trans people are real, then I fully believe you should be removed from power immediately, because you are there to serve the people and you're not there to serve yourself. Hello, not just the GOP party, but a good number of Democrats. Okay, so that was a lot. I'm gonna end it there just so I'm not going on for too much longer. I think we're gonna be okay. The momentum we already have behind our community, I fully believe will be enough to make sure that in the end, we will see a ruling like the marriage equality ruling a few years ago, where we will have full rights. Until next time, take care of each other. I know these headlines are a lot to take in, but take care of yourself. Step back from social media and the news if you need to, and I'll see you next time.